morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and on this week's Roundup, we're going to be taking a look at 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators this past week. It's Wednesday, September 15th, 2021, so let's get right to the questions. For those that are new to the Roundup, you may not be familiar with the format today, but what we do is we have a newsletter that comes out on Mondays called All the SMIE News Fit to Share, and that stands for Social Media and International Education News. That comes out Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, to your inbox free of charge. You can subscribe either through our newsletter. If you have a copy of it, I'm dropping the link to the most recent edition from this past Monday in the chat section or the comments section on the Facebook page for this event, for this live chat. But you can also go to smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and you can fill out a quick form to get the newsletter delivered to your inbox each Monday. So we'll take 3 of the themes we see in that newsletter each week, and then we'll expand upon them here on the Roundup and give our thoughts more in depth as opposed to just our hot takes that you see in the newsletter. And the 3 themes that we're talking about this week are: first, what is U.S. soft power worth in international education? Second, should Africa be on your radar for recruitment? And third, where will UK universities be expanding next? So we'll take a look at those 3 questions and more in the next half hour or so. But what I'd like to start with is one of my favorite topics, and this really came to light for me in the earliest days of my work in international education, when I had my first director of international talking to me about the folks in the profession that are going to be the greatest service to you. And he said these overseas advisors, and by them he meant what would become Education USA advisors in 1999. Those advisors will become some of your best friends because they're really the ones most plugged into what's going on the ground in their various destination countries that you're going to want to work in and recruit students from. So I took that on board, and they certainly have never steered me wrong in terms of my professional development and finding insights in different markets over the years. But part of Education USA is it comes out of the State Department, and that's their network of overseas advising centers in 170 plus countries, 400 plus locations. And one of the first things I found out when I was working for Education USA, and starting in 2008, is they had this list that they were always very proud of. They called it Foreign Students Today, World Leaders Tomorrow. And it was a list of, over the course of 40, 50 years, dozens and dozens of world leaders who had part of their education in the United States. And that always struck me as kind of a what better way to promote your country than to have students from those countries come here, have positive experiences, learn about America, learn about our culture, and then go home and take those positive experiences back to their home countries and then have them become leaders in business and industry, in education, in government. And for that list has always resonated with me, and seems to be a really solid kind of hook upon which to develop a strategy for your institution, for your country, as a primary destination for international education. And that list has always stuck with me as so valuable. It's kind of gone out of print, at least. It's not a regular feature on Education USA's site or in any of the kind of common posts I see during the year. But that gauntlet has been picked up in 2017. There was the Higher Education Policy Institute out of the UK developed what they call the Soft Power Index, and that's an annual thing since 2017. The UK was top of that list back as the way they defined it as current world leaders who are educated in countries other than their own. And from that list in 2017, the UK was at the top. but the U.S. has had gained ground substantially every year since. So UK now is in a comfortable second place with France in third. This is some of the data from this report is very interesting. This is the fifth version in 2021 of the Soft Power Index. Shows that the U.S. now has educated 65 currently serving world leaders, 8 more than the UK's 57. And France is in third. Some way behind those three are Australia and Russia. But France has seen a significant drop over the past couple of years as well. It's interesting to see why this is considered a key mark of soft power. And we've talked about soft power in the past here on the Roundup, mostly in reference to what China has done through their Belt and Road Initiative over the last 2 decades, really, to develop their influence in other parts of the world, particularly Africa, which we'll talk about later, as one of the most significant influences on reasons why their reputation, their strength, their world influence has grown is because of what they've done on the higher ed front. So that they see, among other things, it's also developing political relationships, and some of that's reflected here in the Soft Power Index with the world leaders as the key metric that they're using. Others, like China, they're seeing in international education, they see things a little bit more broadly, not necessarily leaders that have been educated in China. I think there's a long way off before you'll see world leaders who have studied part or where you see a significant number have studied part or all of their education in China. But what I do see is China focusing on more macro level numbers and just focusing on driving, at least in terms of international education, driving students to China for study and using scholarships and some of these relationships that have been developed with these countries as part of that process to grow their reputation. So this Higher Education Policy Institute Soft Power Index does show U.S. has actually grown from 57 to 65 over that 4-year period. They were just ahead of the UK, just behind the UK in 2017, 57 to 58. That was reversed in 2018, 58 to 59, but then since then the U.S. has been on an upward trajectory and widening that gap with the UK. So outside of those two, France is currently at 30. They were at 40 at one point in 2018. Russia is at 10 and Australia at 10 as well, up from 9 4 or 5 years ago. So those are the real the big players in terms of soft power as it's calculated by HEPI. So there's a Pi News article and then the HEPI article related to the release of the Soft Power Index that I'm dropping in the links to the comments section. But interesting to see that how different organizations will measure soft power. And as it relates to international education, I think this is certainly very apropos to talking about, when we talk about perspective. I've mentioned this in the 6 Ps of strategic international enrollment management that I've been developing over the last year and a bit. And that is that's the first and most important piece of the puzzle when developing a plan, is understanding not just your institution, but your country's place in the world when it comes to global student mobility, and understanding that what we're talking about here with regard to the influence your country has and what that means in the wider world. You can point to the overall numbers of international students studying in the United States as a benefit. You can talk about OPT and STEM OPT as some of the major draws to the United States. You can talk about the quality of U.S. institutions in various rankings around the world as indicators of why the U.S. is number one, and that's something you want to champion, and why the U.S. should be the number one destination for all international students. So when we talk about these things in relation to Soft Power Index, this is something that I think is important in terms of perspective. In your messaging to future students, you want to share what what their life might be like if they come to the United States, not just your institution, but to the United States first, because that's a realization we need to have as U.S. international educators on the admissions side and recruiting, that the students you're going after are likely not just looking at the United States as a destination. So you're not just competing against other colleges in the United States that might be peers for you internationally, that you're competing against other countries' universities and other countries as destinations first, where students might be applying to 2 or 3 institutions in 3 or 4 different countries. So you have to have, as in terms of your mindset as an institution, how you message to your prospective student audiences, have those kind of weapons in your arsenal that you can draw out, where you're not just talking about the United States as a reason why, by not just talking about the institution, your institution as a reason why students should come to you, but talk about the benefits of the country as well. That the United States produces more world leaders than anywhere else in the world. If you have, if that's of interest to start, so it may not appeal to anybody if they don't have an interest in economics. They want to come to the U.S. and start their own business. That might be less important, but there are other metrics you can share that would help that student, knowing that half of all startup billionaires in the United States are from immigrant backgrounds, or immigrants themselves, or former international students. So those are the things you need to have in your arsenal, and have that perspective that's sharing not just your institution's success and reasons why students should come to you, but why international students should come to the United States. So the more we incorporate that into our messaging in terms of how we present ourselves to future students, I think the better we're giving those students that are looking for the reasons to pick one country over another. That's something you want to make sure that you're delivering everything that you can to that student, not just the benefits of your institution, which are going to be the primary drivers, but those little extras that can put them over the top in terms of knowing, hey, if I go to the U.S., I have a better chance of, if I want to become a leader in my home country, I have a better way of doing that if I study in the U.S. So use those things to your advantage in your recruitment efforts. So that's the first question. What is it worth, U.S. soft power, worth in international education? More than we realize. And I think that the bottom line is, when we can apply what we learn from these kinds of conversations about influence, about leaders, or world leadership, about the overall numbers, about the values of the U.S. in terms of what we offer to international students, in terms of the nation, in terms of the policy and legal implications of what you can do as an international student, the better we have a chance of recruiting them to the United States, and more specifically to our institutions, depending on how well you communicate that. So let's move on to question number 2. Should Africa be on your recruitment radar? And this is something that I think in larger scope of international student mobility, it is an area of the world that often gets relegated to second or third tier, even tertiary levels, in terms of how highly valued it is as a future market for international students. I say that with a little bit of hesitation, because that's not true in other countries. France has made, because of colonial ties, England, because of colonial ties, have had a long history of bringing students from the African continent to their shores, to their institutions for higher education studies. So there's that language traditions that help influence where students go, that has driven them to the UK and to France in the past. The US, because of quality reasons, certainly has always attracted a large number, and up until recently, the US was comfortably number 2 in the overall volume of students that are studying outside of Africa as a destination. You look at where we are now in 2020, there were 40,000 students, more than 40,000 from sub-Saharan Africa enrolled in U.S. colleges and universities. That was an increase of 4% from the previous year. In the top 25 countries that Open Doors puts out annually, Nigeria is currently the only one in that top list. They saw growth by 3% in 2020, with just over 13,700 students. Ghana was second on that list with 4,000. So there are some markets in that country, in the sub-Saharan African region, that are very much up and comers and kind of ignored markets for a lot of U.S. institutions. I know there are some that will look at Africa and say, oh, it's only for students who are high need. There are some great kids there, high ability kids, but there are also a lot of high need kids. That's not always the truth. That's certainly the historical background. Maybe 20 years ago, that was almost universally the case. But you've seen as their economies have grown, and some countries have grown at faster paces than even China have grown in the same period. You're seeing some of the growth there now reflecting a lot of what's possible for those African nations as their economies have grown. Maybe their higher ed capacity, as it has been in other countries like China and India in the past that have driven large numbers of their students abroad with various push factors out. There in Africa, that's some of those similar trends are occurring where there aren't enough quality places at the top universities in country for undergraduate studies. So you see many undergraduate Africans looking for opportunities abroad. And this is something that I think as we move forward, we're seeing a lot of focus on Africa as an emerging market for U.S. institutions, and I think there are key pockets that certainly are well worth taking a gamble on, and that should prove successful if you do it right. Now, how you do that's a conversation for another day. But in terms of this article, University World News article, it's entitled "Demand for International Studies Still Remains Strong." So you don't know it's about Africa just from the title, but as you get into it, you certainly see it's coming out of the IC3 and IIE recent report, International Student Mobility Flows and COVID-19 Realities, that came out a couple weeks ago. It talks about that despite global travel restrictions, strict visa processing services, and stringent public health policies, many governments are now encouraging universities to recruit international students from the African continent. So in the African context, the article states, the outward mobility of African students declined since the outbreak of the pandemic, but the number of students who were already studying outside their home countries remains stable. So I think that's largely true, and you've certainly seen that. What we haven't talked about related to Africa yet is the presence of China in the mix. You've seen China has actually overtaken France and the U.S. In terms of the number of students studying outside of their home countries as a destination, largely again due to their Belt and Road initiatives through scholarship opportunities they provided as part of their involvement or engagement with these other countries in Africa. We've seen large numbers of Africans go to China for studies. They're actually the largest destination for sub-Saharan African students are those studying in China, as opposed to France and the UK, France, US, and UK, which are second, third, and fourth on that list. 15 years ago, China wasn't even on the top 20 as a destination country for African students. So you see what that soft power, again, going back to our earlier question, is you're seeing some of those changes really take effect in terms of the raw numbers that we're talking. So where this article breaks it down, though, is in kind of what the future is looking like for African student interest in overseas studies. The author breaks it down into two clear categories of winners and losers. Certainly, on the winning side, the U.S., UK, and Canada are likely to gain, as they have from the article, eased travel restrictions to allow international students to re-enter the countries for study purposes, and increased face-to-face instruction that has accompanied those actions. So those are seen as very much positive influences on future growth for African students going to the U.S., UK, and Canada, because they have made efforts to open again at post-pandemic to, even though many of us are still in the midst of it, but open again their borders and allow for face-to-face instruction. Those are the things that students want. That's why they want to study outside their home country. They don't want to study outside their home country just to do an online degree. They want to have that in-country experience that helps them professionally, culturally, socially, that helps them develop into the kind of person with the kind of skills that they will really want to be in their lives. So those countries that make that easier are those who are going to benefit most quickly and probably most substantially in terms of numbers to their countries. So very interested to see where that goes. What on the winner's side, if that actually bears out, I do think it will be the case, because that access is so very important at this point coming out of a pandemic. On the loser side, we do have 3 countries the author identifies, China, Australia, and Japan, that are not benefiting based on their current stances related to study. You see in those countries that the author anticipates although the number of African students seeking higher education abroad is expected to fall significantly in some host countries, such as China, Australia, and Japan, other countries are likely to gain from their losses. And that's where she's talking about US, UK, and Canada. And when we talk about why she identifies those 3 as challenging markets to recruit in African students, is because of that very access issue. Japan has still not allowed large numbers of students back in. China is not allowing anybody outside of NYU Shanghai students back in for over 18 months now. International students who had left and were not able to make it back before China shut its borders in early 2020. You now see them getting increasingly dissatisfied because they're not able to continue their studies, and they have to do everything online. And new students are getting put off by that. They don't want to have that experience. They want to be in country and learn that language and study with students from China and other countries. That's not happening. Same with Australia and New Zealand. You see their borders still closed to international students and may be reopening at some point in 2022. But as a result, they're going now almost 2 years, 2 full recruitment cycles without having in-person studies for new international students. So that has huge implications, and will take. And some prognosticators in Australia and New Zealand, some say it's going to take 4, 5, 6, 7 years to rebound, maybe up to 2030 in New Zealand's case. Some have said there, to rebound to their pre-pandemic levels. So you're seeing really a sea change in what had been 2 of the hotter markets, certainly top destinations, Australia and the UK, Australia and New Zealand, suffering the effects of what their countries' policies have been during the pandemic. And you see China similarly, because of their closed borders, they're losing ground too. You would anticipate their numbers will drop off substantially this fall. So what we're looking at in this particular question on what are some of the potentially emerging markets within Africa that institutions will want to start paying attention to. When we say emerging, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana have always been kind of fairly high on the U.S. scale for student recruitment from the subcontinent. You see sub-Saharan Africa, I should say. They're also on this list. Ethiopia and Cote d'Ivoire are considered from this point. Really the important regions, important countries within the sub-Saharan African region that institutions should be paying attention to in terms of their recruitment efforts. So that's question number 2. Should it be on your radar? Absolutely. And there are certainly ways that you can go about making that happen. So we'll talk more about what that looks like in the weeks and months to come. The last question of the day, where will UK unis be expanding next? Now, this is an interesting topic. The UK universities, we know in the UK, they have their own, actually have an international education policy, which we're all very jealous of. They have what they've called, they have an actual position in the government or within the association world, is considered their UK's International Education Champion. They actually have that as a title for that person. Steve Smith is his name. They've identified a number of countries that the UK should be expanding its influence in terms of universities and expanding educational offerings as well as transnational education offerings. That the UK, because of recent policy changes introducing the graduate route for post-study work and that type of thing, has made it a lot more attractive with the 2-year post-study work visa. After a long period back to 2012 when that wasn't possible, that post-study work as a separate visa category. So what I think, I like this phrase from the article. It says, this is a PI News article entitled, UK must develop position in Brazil, Indonesia, South Korea, and Vietnam. That's according to the Universities UK International Report, that there needs to be improvements made in these core markets to expand its influence, and also some areas that they need to regain influence beyond in India and Pakistan, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia. This article does talk a lot about what the UK can be doing differently to grow. They've talked about one of the post-Brexit realities that many UK universities have had to look at is to keep that significant group of their student bodies, international student bodies, developing a scholarship office for EU students. That there needs to be, in certain markets, these ones, particularly the ones the article identifies in the title, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Indonesia, South Korea, and Vietnam. They're not necessarily Saudi Arabia because of their scholarship programs there, but you see the call for awareness of UK as a study destination is low, despite them being priority countries for the UK's International Education Champion, Steve Smith. That there should be promotional delegations that have media and student-facing activities at the heart, including promotion of the graduate route. That there should be scholarship programs developed for UK and institutional scholarship dollars that should be committed to attract students from those markets, to get the initial students in the door, and continue that interest that way, or develop that interest further there. So the UK is certainly having these kind of conversations about on a national level, which I think is great, because those don't happen really in the US. We hear things at conferences that, oh, we're starting to go here, or we have a new scholarship program developing here that everybody should know about. But this is something that UK government and policy bodies in the UK are saying, here's where UK universities should be devoting time and energy, and here's what we can be doing as a government, here's what you can be doing as a university, where we can work together on those. So these are kind of the dream scenario things that in the US we want to have, where we know that there's going to be government support for recruitment activities and promotion of US higher education in certain countries more than others. That needs to be a part of our global education strategy that we develop as a country. So certainly there are great models. Certainly Canadians' success with their streamlining their immigration process there and making it a very clear process from student to work to permanent resident to citizen. Those things matter. What the UK is doing here in terms of how they position themselves with their post-study work, with the scholarship programs certainly makes a whole lot of sense to me. And I think that these are the kind of models that we can look at in the United States and say, here's where we need to get to. We're not there yet, certainly not by any stretch, but there are certainly some great examples out there with where we can that we can leverage and model as we start to develop our own policies here in the U.S. So that's all we have today from the Roundup. We thank you again for making this midweek Roundup live chat a part of your weekly international edification. And we look forward to continuing the conversation in the weeks and months to come. So thanks again, and have a great day. Cheers.